Hi, this is Howie Singer,
and Bill Rosenblatt,
authors of Key Changes, the 10 Times Technology Transformed the Music Industry.
You're listening to the Your Morning Coffee podcast with our friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Weekly music news for the new music business.
From MIDiA, 2024 Recorded Music Market Share Report is out.
And from Spotify, their 2025 Loud and Clear report is unveiled, plus Howie Singer weighs in.
And from our friend Bill Rosenblatt for Forbes, 4 out of 5 songs sent to music services are never played. What this means for the industry. That's a lot of songs never played, Jay. Well, we're glad you're here. We're going to start the show right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jay, it is so good to see you. We've just been chatting for a good hour, as we like to do, and I heard a little bit about South by Southwest, but tell me more about South by Southwest last week. You got to go to Austin, Texas, hang out, fun stuff.
Yeah, it was a good week. I'm tired, but it was a very good week. I did a panel called Scrubbing the System, Music Data Management Today, with some really smart people. Molly Newman, president of CD Baby, who we've, she's a friend of the podcast. Dave Bogan from the Mechanical Licensing Collective. And also with Rel Lafargue from Reservoir, just some really smart people. A couple of highlights for me. I went to this panel called The Future of Music, Building a Superfan-Centric Business. And that's been a hot topic lately, but it was moderated by our friend Jamie Markinet over at Luminate. Mm-hmm. He did a fantastic job. It was just a stellar group there. And you can listen to these panels on the South by Southwest website. And then finally, I had a great dinner with our friend Chris Castle, who lives somewhat nearby the festivities there. But it was just an absolutely wonderful week.
And it sounds like you had at least one fantastic meal. So
yeah,
that's always what we talk about when you travel. How good was the dinners? And of course, we've got a couple of different specials. We had the Richard Burgess episode, which is live now. And then this coming Wednesday, we have our good friend Dina LaPolte, a conversation we had with her not too long ago.
Man, I just really enjoy talking with her. I wish we could do it more. She's a flamethrower. She's super smart. She's a leader. She's got a new book coming out, a new podcast. She's a force of nature. We love her, Dina LaPolte. Coming this week. There's a couple of stories before we get into the main stories, just a couple of things that I thought were really interesting this week. One of them was from Mandy DeLugdug over at Music Business Worldwide. The headline was Metallica's Mexico concert is coming to Apple's Vision Pro headset. So Apple's announced it's releasing an immersive audio video Metallica concert experience for its Vision Pro headset.
Ooh, very interesting. It is not surprisingly titled Metallica. The performance was filmed during the legendary metal band's sold-out M72 World Tour finale in Mexico City and features full performances of Whiplash 1 and Enter Sandman. It debuted last Friday. That was on March 14th.
Yeah, and you and I are big Dolby Atmos fans, immersive audio fans, and this concert was captured using Apple Immersive Video, which combines 180-degree video with that spatial audio that we were talking about. The format presents multiple viewing angles of band members, ranging from close-up positions to wide-angle views of this in-the-round performance.
Wow, that sounds really cool. Apple rolled out spatial audio and lossless audio with support for Dolby Atmos back in 2021. The following year, the company said more than 80% of the platform's worldwide subscribers had used the feature.
Yeah, and you and I are just such huge fans of spatial audio, especially on the Dolby Atmos side. Another story that I thought was really interesting was from Daniel Tenser over at Music Business Worldwide, and the headline was Sony Music sues USC over music used in social media posts. And I'd never seen anything like that before. So in a complaint that was filed at the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, Sony Music's lawyers presented evidence of 283 social media posts from USC's athletics social media accounts that used 170 Sony-owned songs, which the complaint says were unauthorized uses.
Yikes. The complaint states that Sony Music believes that Discovery will reveal many more infringing uses of Sony Music's sound recordings on the USC social media pages. You can read the entire complaint in the story on Music Business Worldwide, and yeah, that is really, really interesting.
Yeah, it sure is.
By the way, YouTube's newest features for 2025, this is in the Orchard's Daily Rind post. YouTube's newest features for 2025 are designed to enhance your engagement, streamline your content creation process, and expand your reach. Here are the 8 new features, Jay.
Yeah, and I'll kick off the first 4. Number 1 is this new community feed on your YouTube home. Number 2 is thumbnail, what they call test and compare. Excuse me. Number 3, vertical live streaming, which they haven't had. And number 4, 3-minute shorts.
Ooh, interesting. Number 5 is automatic dubbing. And then number 6 is YouTube hype feature. Number 7 is YouTube podcast improvements. And then number 8 is AI-powered inspiration tab. Interesting. Yeah. And I'm not sure I need more engagement with YouTube, to be honest. I'm pretty engaged already. God.
Yeah, me too. So for a detailed look at all of these improvements, check out the article from the Daily Rind. It's in your morning coffee, or you can visit dailyrindblog.com. And if you don't know, Daily Rind is from our good friends over at The Orchard.
Yep, they do a wonderful job. And hey, let's, before we get into the big stories, let's thank our sponsors. We're looking forward to always every week chatting about them because they do so much good work with us. We appreciate it.
They sure do. You know, we're sponsored by the Mechanical Licensing Collective. The MLC is a nonprofit organization, and it's making a big difference for songwriters, music publishers, and other rights holders by transforming how they receive mechanical streaming royalties from services like Spotify, Apple Music in the U.S. Every month, the MLC collects the streaming data and royalties from those platforms and matches the money to the creator who's earned it, and then pays them or their publishers or admin partners the royalties that they're due. To date, the MLC has already distributed over $2.5 billion in total royalties and has nearly 50,000 members worldwide. So if you're a songwriter, composer, lyricist with music streaming, or a publisher or admin, you need to become a member of the MLC to ensure you're not leaving any money on the table. Best of all, membership's completely free, and the MLC pays out 100% of the royalties it receives. Visit themlc.com to learn more.
Oh, indeed. Hey, and let's talk about getting artists paid. If you're handling royalties or finances, you already know how tricky payouts can get, but they don't have to be. Trolley is a payouts platform designed specifically to simplify your royalty payout process from end to end. Easily onboard artists from anywhere in the world, verify identities, and automate payments to over 210 countries and territories, all from one simple dashboard. Give your artists the payment flexibility they're looking for, same-day bank transfers, PayPal, Venmo, or even checks, so they're happy you're getting paid faster and with fewer headaches. Trolley also keeps things safe with built-in fraud protection and know your artist verification, so you're only paying people who have earned these funds. Plus, come tax season, Trolley automatically prepares, distributes, and files 1099 and 1042 forms. Join industry leaders like SoundCloud, Bandcamp, United Masters, CD Baby, DistroNation, and Hopeless Records, to name just a few, who've already simplified their payouts with Trolley. Ready to see why industry leaders have made the move to Trolley? Well, visit trolley.com/YMC. That's trolley.com/YMC. Great stuff.
Yeah, and a special thank you to Music.ai. Music.ai is a trailblazing AI-powered music and audio platform offering an expansive suite of over 50 stackable AI audio solutions. You want to change the tempo or pitch of your song, adjust instruments or vocals, mute background noise. Music.ai makes it all so easy. Embraced by record labels, agencies, tech firms, and developers, Music.ai is synonymous with audio innovation. With over 45 million users, their tools process over 2 million minutes of audio every day. They can process yours today. Visit music.ai to get started.
Another place where I get completely lost and lose track of time.
So much fun.
Oh my God. And hey, every week I get to hang out with my good friend Jay Gilbert. He's a music industry consultant. He's the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups. And I'm going to be traveling with him on American, and I'm hoping that he's going to take me into this cool lounge.
That is so cool because we don't get to travel together very often, and we've attended some events together, and that's always so much fun. But we're going to Ohio University next week for their music summit. We're going to do a couple of presentations. We're going to do the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to it. I get to do this podcast every single week with my good friend Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Group, where he and I talked about music at lunch many, many times and sort of led to what you're listening to today.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Well, let us jump into the stories, Jay. The first one is from our friend Daniel Tenser over at Music Business Worldwide. The headline, Global Recorded Music Revenues rose 6.5% to $36.2 billion in 2024, says MIDiA Research. One of the key takeaways from MIDiA's Recorded Music Market Share Report, released on Thursday, this last Thursday, is this. Global recorded music revenue growth is slowing, and going forward, artists and rights holders should focus on growing expanded rights, i.e. better monetizing superfans, rather than counting on streaming revenue growth.
Yeah, we always love these MIDiA reports. They're just the best. And the headline stat from MIDiA's new report, global recorded music revenues rose 6.5% year over year to $36.2 billion, as you stated. That marks a slowdown from 2023 when revenues rose almost 10% year over year per MIDiA's estimates. The impact of music streaming is lessening, MIDiA said, and 2024 marked the first year in which streaming's share of total recorded music didn't increase.
Right. So MIDiA said the contribution of streaming to overall industry growth also fell to a little less than 69%, down from 65% in 2023. The report states that the much anticipated streaming revenue deceleration, despite recent price increases, has now arrived. Industry attention is turning to super premium tiers and new monetization models to reignite growth, they said.
Yeah, MIDiA suggests future revenue growth will increasingly rely on expanded rights, meaning things such as merch, sponsorships, branding, and other sources of revenue outside of sales of music itself. In terms of market share, non-major labels saw their share of revenues grow for the third consecutive year. Their growth outpaced the major labels, according to MIDiA.
Interesting. MIDiA's Artist Direct segment, meaning self-releasing artists who distribute their music through platforms like CD Baby, DistroKid, and TuneCore, saw revenue to $2 billion in 2024.
Yeah, and there was another piece written by Glenn Peoples on this subject that I thought was really interesting. His headline was Global Recorded Music Revenue and Streaming Grew More Slowly in 2024. And he pointed out that price increases in 2023 by Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music Unlimited, and Apple Music, they all help fuel that year's near double-digit streaming gain. Spotify raised prices in the U.S. in 2024 too, and gave subscribers the option to opt into a less expensive audiobook-free tier, although a Morgan Stanley survey found that just 17% of individual premium subscribers had done so last year.
Well, faced with the realities of market growth, the growth-minded record industry is looking to streaming services to continue raising prices and offer super premium tiers at elevated prices for subsets of subscribers. In March, Universal Music Group Chief Digital Officer Michael Nash stated the company is in talks with multiple streaming platforms about super premium tiers. He said, "We think this is going to be an important development for segmentation of the market."
Yeah, super interesting. Our next story was talked about a lot this week. Spotify has just unveiled this year's Loud and Clear report. That's Spotify's annual report that they put out. And we're going to go through what they put in the report, and then we're going to have sort of a touch base with Howie Singer about it. So Spotify stated that a record $10 billion has been paid out. For another year, Spotify was the highest paying retailer globally for music, paying the music industry over $10 billion.
Right. So talking about streaming's rising tide, in the decade from 2014 to 2024, Spotify's yearly payouts to the music industry increased 10 times from $1 billion to over $10 billion. Back in 2014, the music industry hit a low point when global recorded music revenues were only $13 billion. Since that low point, global recorded revenue has more than doubled to over $28 billion in 2023, according to the IFPI. Today, there are well over 500 million paying listeners across all music streaming services.
Yeah, that's quite impressive. The industry has definitely benefited from streaming. And they talk about in this report what they call the paradox of modern music industry. There are more artists making more money on Spotify than ever before. In fact, the number of artists generating royalties at every threshold on the site, from $1,000 to $10 million per year, those artists, that's tripled since 2017. Looking back to the peak of the CD era, only a few thousand artists had their music on the shelves of record stores. The paradox? Streaming has allowed millions to easily share their music globally, and that's an amazing thing.
Right. They talk about the 100,000th artist, thousands in royalties. Over the past decade, the 100,000th ranked artist on Spotify has seen their generated royalties multiply by over 10 times, increasing from well under $600 back in 2014 to almost $6,000 in 2024. As a point of comparison, at the peak of the CD era, Tower Records carried only 50,000 CDs from thousands of artists in total.
Yeah, another record year for songwriters. Spotify paid out $4.5 billion to publishing rights holders, and they represent songwriters. Over the last 2 years, songwriters, through their publishers, PROs, and collecting societies, are generating record-breaking revenues driven by streaming services.
Right. So they also talked about new music millionaires. In 2024, nearly 1,500 artists generated over $1 million in royalties from Spotify alone, and likely over $4 million across all recorded revenue sources. This isn't just a story about household names. 80% of these artists didn't have a song reach the Spotify Global Daily Top 50 chart in 2024. Success in the streaming era doesn't require a chart-topping hit or a decade-spanning catalog. It's about building a loyal fan base that keeps coming back.
Yeah, they talk about the sustained rise of indies. In 2024, independent artists and labels collectively generated more than $5 billion from Spotify, representing about half of the total Spotify royalties for another year. Spotify globally represents about 1/3 of overall recorded streaming revenue. That's according to the IFPI, but represents over 50% of indie streaming revenue, and that's according to MIDiA.
Right. Well, so To kind of counter all of that information, our friend Howie Singer weighs in. This is from LinkedIn. He said, not surprisingly, Spotify's loud and clear report is generating a lot of discussion. He says one topic that always comes up is that artists are not fairly compensated from streaming. He said, if you dig into the numbers, one begins to understand that the enormous and growing number of artists who have access to fans through streaming represents a hurdle to achieving adequate payments. So fact number one, the number of uploaders to Spotify is nearly 12 million.
Yeah, and he points out that fact number two is only 22,100 artists on Spotify generated $50,000 in annual royalty payments. Of course, that goes to the rights holders. So that means that more than 11.9 million uploaders generated less than $50,000 per year on Spotify. Given that a $15 per hour wage equates to roughly $30,000 a year, let's make the assumption that achieving that $50,000 level would be perceived by many creators as constituting a much fairer outcome. And yes, Spotify doesn't pay artists directly, so only a portion of that $50,000 makes its way to the artist. But that number is a benchmark anyway. So it's not at all surprising that so many musicians feel their hard work is not yielding an adequate return.
Right. So Howie says, I think we can agree that not all of those almost 12 million people create music that is good enough to engage a substantial audience. He says, let's just assume for the sake of argument that 10% of these artists fall into that category. And if they generated an extra $30,000 per year, they would on average reach that $50,000 benchmark. $30,000 more for each of 1.19 million people equates to nearly $36 billion. But wait a second, he says, Spotify's annual revenues in 2024 were just $16 billion.
Yeah, so Howie says, conclusion number one, even doubling the price of Spotify would not provide enough funds to pay this incremental amount. And that's without considering the shortfall that would result from people dropping their now more expensive subscription.
Right. And Howie says conclusion number two is given that payments are determined by a share of total plays, even if every user on Spotify shifted all their listening away from the most popular artists, and he's just talking about an unlikely event, relocating the available pool of money would fall short.
Yeah. So his conclusion number three, the other 90% of uploaders who we assumed were not producing music worthy of additional compensation would still be complaining about the system. The democratization, that's easy for you to say, of access to the worldwide audience of potential fans is a phenomenal outcome for artists, but it sets up financial expectations that are simply unachievable. As the saying goes, the math isn't mathing.
The math isn't mathing. That is my favorite line of the entire story. But, again, he talks about the democratization of access. And it is true. It is remarkable that so many people have that access now. But guess what? It's the good news, bad news. It's very, very difficult to make a living. And as we've talked about a number of times, should we all expect to make a living with music? I don't know.
No,
and so
I don't think so.
No, exactly. Hey, let's thank the rest of our sponsors, Jay. By the way, as we get rolling on this, we really appreciate, of course, all of their participation in helping us put the show together.
Yeah, we sure do. Let's thank Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are really changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. Edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton, with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
Indeed, Bands in Town. Over 90 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist service platform connecting over 650,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms. Big thanks. Totally appreciate it. And Jay, our final story, 4 out of 5 songs sent to music services are never played. What this means for the industry, and this is from our friend Bill Rosenblatt for Forbes. Bill says the number of tracks available on music streaming services is shooting further and further into the stratosphere. That's a great line, so true. Yeah. Another number is growing as well. Tracks that are uploaded and then never played. A 2024 year-end report from music data service Luminate shows that more than 200 million tracks are available on music services worldwide. Yet new data from the streaming music service Deezer indicates that of the tens of millions of tracks uploaded in the past year, 78% of them, yes, 78% of them have never been played. Yikes.
Wow. The music industry doesn't like to talk about this phenomenon, yet these numbers indicate that the industry is approaching an inflection point. He goes on to say that Deezer may not be a household word in the U.S., but this Paris-based streaming service is a major one worldwide, available in over 180 countries. It launched in 2007 before Spotify and chose to limit its exposure in the U.S. until recently.
Right. So Deezer reports that it receives about 150,000 new tracks every day and that the number is growing. That contrasts with the numbers that Luminate has been reporting. Luminate's year-end reports show that the average number of tracks submitted to streaming services per day reached a peak of 120,000 in the first quarter of 2023 and then dropped to an average of 99,000 over all of 2024. Deezer's figure is actually 50% higher.
Yeah, this is super interesting. Bill says, what accounts for this difference? Likely this: music services worldwide send Luminate data on play counts for all of the tracks in their catalog, but only some of them, including Deezer, send data on tracks that have 0 plays. In previous years, Luminate used to report the number of tracks that got 0 plays during the year. It was 45.6 million out of 184 million in 2023, we reported. But they no longer report that. Luminate's figures for 2024 show only that 93.2 million tracks, that's 46% of the 202 million total, so 93.2 million tracks got 10 plays or fewer during the year.
So in other words, the number of tracks submitted per day that are ever played is going down even as the total number of tracks submitted per day increases. So let's talk about the volume of music. To underscore how mind-bogglingly large these numbers are, consider that the number of recordings per year released worldwide during the CD era of the 1980s was in the range of 20 to 30,000, or well under 100 per day. That's shocking when you put it that way. Yeah. It's also likely that Deezer's figure of 150,000 tracks per day is similar for other major digital music services, given that most of them are released by labels and digital distributors that send content to all the major music services worldwide. By the way, Google and Spotify shockingly declined to comment.
Yeah, Deezer estimates that about 10% of the tracks it receives are fully AI generated. We've been talking about this a lot. This percentage is likely on the low side, given that Deezer's AI detection technology is trained on the music AI platforms Suno and Udio, and therefore might miss tracks generated by other platforms such as Moobert, Boomy, or Soundful. And you and I at the Music Tectonics conference, we talked to an executive who handles a lot of this, and he thought that that number was double that.
Yes, double that. Bill says, then there are the ambient or noise tracks that are designed to be played in the background on repeat. Such tracks have been on the rise for several years. The music industry has decried them as lower quality functional content that only leeches royalties away from true artists.
Another small percentage of daily track submissions are redeliveries, labels or distributors sending tracks that they'd submitted before for reasons that included re-releases and metadata updates. Finally, a slice of these tracks are fraudulent, such as, fake artists, fraudsters passing off famous musicians' music as their own.
Right. So he says, yet these all add up to at the most a third of all submitted tracks. This still means that at least 100,000 tracks are sent to music services every day that are at least in part by human artists, or about 1,000 times the volume created during the CD era. Wow.
That's crazy. And let's talk about supply and demand. The problem here is simply one of supply and demand. While the supply of music grows at an increasing rate every year, the demand for it barely budges. Growth in streaming decelerated dramatically over the past year. Illuminate reports that audio streaming growth in the U.S. last year went down over 6% from more than 12% growth in each of the previous 2 years. That's substantial. Global growth, including higher growth areas such as Africa, South America, those went down by a third to 14% from over 22% in 2022 and 2023.
Right. So Illuminate's data also shows that the percentage of catalog music, and remember, catalog music is something 18 months old or older, that people listen to has inched up from 69.8%, so almost 70% in 2021 to 73.3% last year, showing that the demand for new music is decreasing even as overall demand growth slows down.
Yeah, he goes on to say that, as some in the industry have been saying for years, the path that the industry is on is not sustainable for developing new music, but instead of what has been a micro story, that of individual musicians declining royalty payments, these numbers tell a macro story at an industry level. The overall picture is that each musician's slice of the pie is getting thinner, faster, then the pie is getting bigger. More industry factions are starting to agree that the current model is unsustainable. There's been an industry-wide cone of silence over these numbers that Illuminate and Deezer deserve credit for starting to lift.
Right. He says it's not just that the vast majority of musical artists who are unhappy with the current situation. Major record labels are unhappy with the deluge of new music that they don't control. Independent distributors are unhappy with the growing percentage of royalty payments for their artists that are too low to be worth processing. Digital music services also likely lose money managing rights and royalties for a growing percentage of artists on their platforms. Spotify's recent royalty model changes include not paying royalties on tracks that get less than 1,000 plays in a year. And they surely don't appreciate having to ingest and manage the sheer volume of music that they have in their catalogs.
Sheer volume indeed. Changes to the current model are looking more and more necessary. The basic model of streaming music services, access to just about all the world's music from a celestial jukebox for a monthly subscription price or free with ads, that hasn't changed in over 15 years. It's just unclear what changes should be made. Even so, we're beginning to see signs of deviation from the established streaming model from some of the major services. These are taking different forms.
Right. So talk about the changes coming. One is the strategy that Spotify is reportedly readying for launch later this year, charging an additional monthly fee for a Music Pro tier that could include features such as AI-powered remixes, which the startup company Hook currently offers, priority access to concert tickets, and higher audio quality. This lines up with the superfan strategy that the major labels have been pushing recently and will likely focus on the artists that those labels can get to agree to participate.
Yeah, another is the fan-powered royalty scheme that SoundCloud introduced in 2021. In this, labels and artists get paid according to what proportion of each user's monthly plays are of their music rather than merely on the number of streams they get in a given country. This model is intended to reward fan engagement and is limited to independent or indie label artists only.
Right. Bill says none of these new models entail curating the catalog being offered, but Deezer is doing this. Last year, Deezer adopted a policy of purging noise and other junk tracks. It began by deleting 26 million tracks, amounting to 13% of its entire catalog. It deletes newly submitted noise tracks on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, Deezer is also penalizing AI-generated tracks by excluding them from its algorithmic playlists. In all, Deezer is making moves towards becoming more of a purist music service while remaining attractive to a general audience. Deezer does offer ambient and noise tracks that it generates itself for which it pays no royalties.
That is really interesting, by the way. More changes are happening at another end of the spectrum, specialty services that focus on specific genres or listening situations. Some of these have been around for years, such as Beatport for DJs, Adagio for classical music, and Qobuz for audiophiles. Yet more of these kinds of services have appeared recently, such as Dido for African music, Spinrilla for hip-hop mixtapes, although that shut down back in 2023 after a copyright lawsuit, and Deezer's own Zen by Deezer, which is a wellness app.
Yeah, Bill goes on to say that each of these has features that are specific to a genre or use case that the big general music services can't or won't include. For example, Adagio has metadata for classical aficionados that they require, such as information about orchestras, conductors, soloist movements, while Beatport helps DJs choose tracks by BPM, beats per minute, and key.
Right. Bill says these are the kinds of services that should flourish in the coming years, although none is likely to achieve the sheer scale of a Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube Music. They indicate possible directions for music streaming services that sustain creators and listeners alike. Wow, that is fascinating stuff. And
yeah, great stuff from Bill Rosenblatt. Love seeing Howie Singer and Bill Rosenblatt included this week. You and I have been raving about their book, Key Changes. If you haven't read that book,
God, it's a great book.
You have to. It is just the best book I've ever read on sort of disruptions in the music industry, and it really helps you to understand how we got to where we are.
Well, and you and I have talked a few times on the podcast about our experiences of working with companies, and very few music companies onboard you and give you backstories and history of how we got to where we are. And the Key Changes book is so wonderful on giving you that entire history. It's just a fantastic
It's a must read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about Bill's article and about kind of the changing face of a lot of these services, I remember reading an article a couple of years back about Disneyland, the Disneyland here on the West Coast, not the one in Florida or elsewhere in the world. But they were talking about how they were having difficulty managing the crowds and the demand for Disneyland. And this article mentioned the only real lever that Disneyland has out here is raising prices to moderate crowds. And so I'm wondering if it's going to start seeing prices going up for artists to put their music up. And maybe that's a way of moderating all of this stuff. I don't know. It's a hell of a problem.
Yeah, I think we're heading that direction because, the last thing I'll say is that there are costs associated with this. And Bill points that out in this piece, which we don't normally see, that it costs money and resources when you have this sheer fire hose of data of all these releases, on average 150,000 to Deezer, just every single day. That is a lot of data to manage. So to your point, we've heard this discussion before that maybe it gets to a point that, if you're going to put your music on Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, Deezer, that if you don't hit certain thresholds, maybe there's an annual fee associated with that. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see where this goes. But fantastic piece from Bill Rosenblatt for Forbes.
Yeah, it was really a pause to make you think about all of this.
Yeah,
hey, as we wrap up the show, if you enjoy the show, please tell one friend. Jay and I would certainly appreciate it. Big thanks to the MLC, Music.ai, Hypebot, and Bands in Town. We certainly appreciate that. And Trolley for helping us put the show together. Great stuff. So thanks to all of our sponsors. So on behalf of my good friend Jay Gilbert, I'm Mike Etchart. I say thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.